Welcome to Lesson 5 of PSRM Fundamentals Overview. We'll be discussing the tax form, introducing you to its life cycle, the form type and configuration needed to create a tax form. And we will be also looking at a little bit at the end at form upload staging. We'll be using a sales and use tax form to create assessments and payments on top of the registration form that we created and the taxpayer that we created already, who's pre-registered. And after that we will also be adjusting the tax form, changing it and adding different financial transactions from the original one. And then we can also add something called a tax form amendment. We're going to carry on now and look at a tax form. A tax form differs from a registration form in the fact that it not only can create the taxpayer, it will create financial transactions. We are using a sales and use example. Sales and use, if you look at the tax type, is set that it says here that the tax, it says pre-registration rule required. That basically means that for sales and use you need to already have a registration form, and a tax form will only be used to add in the financial transactions. So I'm going to now create a tax form for the sales and use that we created earlier for store. It's actually store BBB that we created previously, and we're going to add in the information necessary. So I'm going to go to the main. I'm going to go to form, and now I'm going to choose tax form instead of registration form. Tax form plus for new, and I'm going to pick out a tax form for sales and use. I'm going to fill in this again. I'm going to use a tax form filing type. There's different types of filing types, and we're going to use it like an original tax form. We see as well there are actually other options like an amendment, an audit, a duplicate. We're going to look at some of these later on. Fill in the receive date for the tax form, and I'm going to use today's date. Again, we can use the check form to see what other things I need to fill in, and you see there are quite a few things I need to fill in. I'm going to go to the taxpayer information, and I'm going to put in the same name as we had before, which is store BBB, because I'm now adding to that pre-existing registered taxpayer. I'm going to be adding in the tax form, and since the pre-registration flag was set to be required, it means I need to I can't actually create a new taxpayer through this form. I can just reference and find it within the system and add those assessments on top. So I'm going to use the ID type, and I have to fill in the same ID as I had before, and show you that what happens. Let's say if I did something like this and used a wrong ID number, it will come up with primary store BB. See, it finds that with a different ID exists. So if you remember, I used 1, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I don't have to fill in address information because the address information is already filled in, and now you have to fill in a filing period, and I want to use the filing period for 2014, let's say the first quarter. So I'm going to fill in the first quarter. Check to see if that's okay now. So that's filled in, so that's okay. Now I need to fill in the line items. So this is actually the line items of the things I've sold within that particular quarter. So I'm going to use some pretty simple numbers as an example. That I actually have gross sales of $10,000, which is my total. If I, by the way, if I make a mistake and do something like this and my calculations are wrong, you will see again that we have different form rules which actually tell you what my mistakes are. So here, total 3 has to be this plus this. So there are many rules, and we saw form rules earlier, and they do the validation to make sure that my calculations are correct. So I filled in my total correctly. I need to put in my total here as well, which I'm going to put a rate for how much I pay for, again using very simple numbers. And total assessed amount, I have owe 1,000. 1,000. By the way, you should see that we have in this particular section three different we have three as reported, as current, and change reason. We have different columns. Previously, in different sections, we didn't have that, and I'll show you when we look at the form type where we define that. So I'm putting that in. I'm putting 1,000 there. I'm also enclosing, let's say, a payment that I'm paying. I owe $1,000, but I send a check in at the same time for $1,000. Let's see if my numbers are okay. If I have any errors here, it says I'm still missing a prepare information. I need to fill in some information for the preparer. I'm just going to put in a address. I think that might be sufficient. Let's just see. So it says it's been successfully verified. I can save the form. And hopefully now I can move on. After I've saved it, the tax form is now saved and is in state. So have a look what we've done. We've seen that it's been able to pick up the existing person, account, tax or obligation, and filing period, which already exist in the system. And then we'll see those are actually validation form rules which are able to pick up that information. Again, this tax form expects that there's already a registration form, which there is, as we know from previously. So that's found that information, and now we're just going to validate to make sure that everything works okay. Good, and we've moved on. I can see the fact that we have posting, but we've found even an obligation that we're going to be posting our assessment to, and I can now post. And what posting will do at this step will actually create those now financial transactions to be added to the obligation. This will be the first time that we will look at financial transactions, and we should expect that the balance will actually be affected. Till now, balances have always been zero, so now they will be changed. So let's see what happens. So I post the tax form. And we see that we have now changed the tax form to a state of posted. And what we see is now we have an adjustment called an assessment for €1,000, and that is related to this 1,000 that we created over here. And we see that there are other options to do, and we'll look at those later on. The first thing, we can look at the current context. We see that the balance is shown to be 316. Maybe that's not so clear why that should be. One thing we can do, I'm going to actually use my other tab. I can go to Home, and I'm going to look up this particular user, this particular taxpayer. Sorry, I'm going to use store. Remember, we're using BBB at the moment. And this is the first time we're going to click on financial information, and we're going to be able to see what's happened. Okay, so what do we see? We have a tax form which created an assessment for 1,000, and that's again because of this particular line over here, total assessed tax amount. So this is the amount over here, and in fact if I click on that, I see below the financial transaction that was created for 1,000 euro. It also happens to be that I created at the same time a payment, right? I created a payment, and that's because I said enclosed payment 1,000. By the way, when we look at our log on the tax form, remember it shows me those particular things that were created. So in fact there was 1,000 created for the assessment, 1,000 for the payment, and that's why that's this amount collected. Minus signs reflect payments into the system, positive are debts. So that makes sense. Now, there's some interest, failure to file, or failure to pay penalties. Well, why should that be so? Well, the reason for that we will discuss a lot when we go to penalties and interest, but we shouldn't be too surprised because this particular assessment was for the first quarter, and in fact the date, expected date, came from that due date on the calendar, and that's the 15th of April. But we only actually filed this tax form. When did we file our tax form? We filed our tax form today. So that's quite a few months late. So because of that, and you'll see that we have a date over here of the 30th of December. So that's why we have a failure to file penalty as a result. Okay, so we have the day after immediately for failing to, but we also have interest and failure to pay because the payment also only came in today, and the expectation was that you should also pay on time. So this shouldn't worry us too much. In fact, we should expect this. So this particular taxpayer filed and paid too late, and that's why it gets a penalty and now has a balance of $300 or so. Okay, so let's just go back to the tax form one more moment and have a look at a few more things. We have an exceptions just like we had for the registration form. There were no exceptions because we didn't have any errors, so we didn't see any, but we do have we only have one version, also because we didn't have to make any changes. As we said before, we have a log as well showing you everything that happened for that particular tax form. Now, in a similar way for the registration form, we have a form type. If I go to the form type, you will see that we similarly have many rules for the form type. Dependent upon the different status that it's in, different rules will run. Okay, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but there are basically the engine which performs all the different functionality at the different states within the form. And in a similarly as well, we have the different sections which need to be filled in. And just to show an example on the line items, if I click on, let's say, one of these, what will we see? That we have the definition of the fields. We also actually have line details, and in this particular case, if you remember, we have a current as reported as changed, and as a result of that, we have those three different columns. Okay, so the fact that we have this filled in over here means that on the tax form, if I go to the line items, we have as reported, as current, and change reason. And how are these used? These are used in a situation when I make a change before posting. Then after every single change, I first of all would need to fill in a change reason to say why I change it from the original. And as reported is basically the original amount when the first time the tax form was stored, the first version, and will always show the as reported, the first version. As current is the updated latest value. In this particular case, the as reported and as current are the same because we didn't make any changes. So this is a way of actually showing side by side the initial original amounts versus the updated amount. And as I said, the form type generates this user interface, and it does that by defining the as reported and as current flags that we just saw. So that is this is the tax form, and now what I would like to show is a next state. Do some more changes to the tax form, and in this case let's have a look at the different options we have for the tax form. Now we're going to see later on that we can change the receive date of the tax form, and that will affect the P&I, the penalties. We can do an audit, and we'll look at that later. Reversing will basically reverse out everything that we've done and cancel this tax form completely. In this particular case, if I want to make an adjustment to this original tax form, I can click adjust, and let's just see how that works. I click on adjust, and it asks me for the reason why I wanted. Say there was a correction, there was a mistake in this particular tax form, original tax form, and I'm going to click OK. And let's just see how that affects. So the first thing you should see, I always use the current context. It's gone down to minus 1,000. That's interesting. Minus 1,000 means that now it's an overpayment. We have the $1,000, and the reason why we have $1,000 is because of the payment. The payment was sent in, but it cancelled. What happened was that all the different charges were cancelled because we are going to actually make a change to it. We can see that. So I always use the 360. It gives me a nice overview of all the financials, and it shows me that basically there's an unallocated credit for 1,000 at the moment. This has not been refreshed yet, so it doesn't. Sometimes the current context needs to be refreshed, and now it's refreshed correctly. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you that we have two tax forms. We have the original one, which was now set as adjusted. It means basically we cancelled it and we moved over the data to the pending new tax form, and now I could make changes to it, and in this particular case I'm going to edit it, and I'm going to add in, let's say, because there was an original mistake, I'm going to add something to it. So I'm going to go to the line items, and let's say there was a mistake of I missed out another purchase that is a subject to tax. So I'm updating this information now. In fact, not going to change the payment. The closed payment was correct. I only paid in 1,000. I'm not going to change that. I'm going to save that. So I make an adjustment to this original tax form. And I'm going to validate and post. And we see there now that the the balance is higher than previously because of the extra $100. Okay, again I'm going to use my 360-degree view to see again what the status is. And if you see at the moment, now we have a 1,100 for the tax, and the amount collected is only 1,000, and therefore we have a balance of 448 together with the interest and other things charged. So that makes sense, and that is what we mean when we have a we have two tax forms now, one which is now cancelled, which is the adjusted one, and one which is the original one, which is posted now, meaning the updated adjusted tax form. So that is fine. We've shown therefore what an adjustment is. A transfer is a very similar to adjustment, but let's say I wanted to transfer this whole tax form to a different different tax person. In other words, it was put in wrong with the wrong person name. I could use a transfer to do that. Now let me show you one other thing, and that is something called an amendment. I'm going to not change this original tax form, but add an amendment to this original, and add amendment, in other words, another tax form. And how would I do that? Well, I could just simply go here by going to the tax form. And this time I'm going to take the same tax form, but I'm going to add in as an amendment. And the receive date, I'm going to, I don't know, keep it the same as it was. Taxpayer information, again, is going to be as we had before. Just check to see whether the ID is correct. I don't remember. Yes, it looks like the same. I have other errors, but that's fine. And again, I'm going to use the same period because I'm making an amendment to the same period as previously. And what I'm going to do is and the change I'm going to make here, the amendment, is instead of actually having a tax rate of 10%, let's say it really is 9%. So that means that actually the total assessed amount should really be 990. Payment, I'm not adding in a new payment, and that's basically it. I'm going to just add in my date here, check my form, everything is okay, I save it. Now I expect that the very fact that the rate goes down, that my assessment should go down. So it'd be interesting to see how that's reflected in the system. First of all, I'm going to validate everything. And I'm going to post. But as I see now, I made a mistake that I created this as an original tax form, as you see, and therefore it didn't act as an amendment. So in fact, what we have at the moment, by mistake, is the fact that if I look at what we have over here, is that we have a high assessment made up now of two different transactions. an assessment for 1,100 and 990. It didn't go down because my mistake was that, what did I do wrong here? What I did was that I created it as as an original tax form, and this was not meant to be an original tax form, and therefore it's incorrect. What I'm going to do, I'm going to reverse it, because this is actually incorrect. So, and now we'll show you how we do a reverse, and I'm going to have to create a new one. Incorrect posting. That was an incorrect posting. I made a mistake. And now that transaction should be removed. And it goes back to what it was originally. If I do this again, the amounts go back to how they were previously. Okay. By the way, here I can actually look at the whole account. I can look at a tax roll specifically on a particular obligation. It even shows me the different assessments. We have 2 cancelled assessments, just one of them over here, which we have left frozen. These 2 are not in play. So anyway, that's the situation. And now I made a mistake with the tax form. I'm going to actually create one again. Okay, so what I'm going to do is do another tax form, but remember to do this one as an amendment. So quickly, I'm going to change this to amendment, and I'm going to use online, but this one I'm going to do, this one should actually work differently than an original. It shouldn't add on a new assessment. It should actually reduce it, as we remember that we lowered the amounts. So the business name again has to be the same as before, otherwise we will have problems. The ID has to match with existing in the system. Just make sure that I always don't remember the ID. Just make sure the ID is correct. It looks like it's alright. Again, I just do the check form just to make sure that the validation on the ID number. I know I have a lot more to fill out still. Again, and over here, I'm going to fill out how the information was before. And here, this is where we had 9%, so this is 990, and I'm going to fill this in. It says duplicate. Make sure that I have the right amendment. Let's see, make sure I have saved that. So again, now it's setting the filing type to be amendment. The amounts have gone down to 990, so I should expect that when I post that my assessment should be reduced. And as you see, it's gone down to 303. Let's go to our 360-degree view. Let's see. You can see it's gone down to the 990, and that's good. Now, how did it work from 990? Well, let's have a look. Actually, what happened? You see that we actually have called a negative adjustment. And assessments don't only have to be positive; they can be negative. And in fact, when I display my 990 over here, I will see that it's made up of the 1,100 and a -1. And that's fine because I have it reduced because of the amendment, and that's why it's gone down to 990. So that makes sense. And that basically explains to you the tax form, and hopefully you have an understanding of how that works. So what did we see? We see that we have quite a rich life cycle for the tax form. It starts in status pending, and it goes through validation and runs different form rules to validate the tax form. And again, just to underline that, the form type here has the rules that are running at validation, and these are the validation rules that run. We check on things like the DLN uniqueness. There's a unique document number. We had an error like that. Existence, whether you have the ID in the right format, whether taxpayer exists, and so on, and all other types of calculations to make sure that the numbers are correctly inputted. So that's the validation. Then, if everything goes smoothly, it goes to ready for posting, and at that stage it posts and runs the form rules which are set under the posting step, which are create a filing obligation if it doesn't exist, create assessments, can also create payments, right? We have payments, and sometimes even overpayments if we set that up. So it can do quite a lot at the different steps. If there are any errors, it goes into suspense or sometimes waiting for information, and you can actually cancel. You can cancel it. If after it's posted, what we saw recently, that you can reverse, and that will cancel all those financial transactions. If, for example, we adjusted it, the financial transactions are cancelled as well, and then you can re-edit it and change it to a new numbers. We also saw an assessment, different types of tax form, an amendment, which actually works differently than an original. If an original tax form, it just adds on new assessments, but if it's an amendment, it will actually deduct the amounts, as we saw. So the amounts after we changed the rate to from 10% to 9%, the assessment went down, and it created a negative assessment. So if we could summarize the different entities we use on the form type to configure a form, we see that the two most important things are the sections and lines and the form rules. The sections and lines are used to actually create the user interface for the form, and the form rules are used to actually run the different algorithms and business rules that need to happen at different statuses of the form lifecycle. And we know that we have a form type both for registration and for a tax form, and they're responsible to deal with these different entities that we are now familiar with: person account, tax roll obligation, and the newly discussed one, which is the assessment and adjustment, that we will talk about even more very soon. If we look at the life cycle, we haven't looked at the life cycle of a form type itself. We looked at the form, but not the form type. If you created a new form type, then when you generate something called a generation of the form type, that's when it will use those sections and lines. Those sections and lines which are defined on the form type, that's when through the generation step you will create the underlying called business object with what's called the UI map, which creates the user interface. So you can actually create a whole look and feel of the form type, the form, based upon those sections and lines. Only when it's in the active state can you use it. You can put a state of a form type in inactive, and it can be used. If it's inactive, it cannot be used in the system. And if you want to change a form type, then you can put it back to pending and recreate it and add new sections and lines. The last thing I would like to show you, that is something called the form upload process. What I've described to you is an online simulation of how a tax form, a registration form, comes into the system, and I added it in with manual data entry. Normally, it will be uploaded, these forms, in batches from a different system, and this slide just describes really the process that could happen in reality. From a form upload file, you could create implementation, can create a process which will put the forms into something called a batch headers and upload staging, and then from there it's manipulated into the right form and creates the tax form. I'm not going to go into great detail about this, but to show you one example in the system that you could look at, and that is within the first of all, the menu structure under forms, we have form upload staging, and I've taken an example of a tax form for this fruit market grocery, and it's actually linked to a form upload staging record. And if you go to the form upload staging record, you will see the information which was originally uploaded to the system. It has the form detail, and it has something called the batch headers, which describes the original data that the form from which the form was created. So my point of actually showing this information is mainly to show you that form are not normally manually inputted. They normally come through a upload process in a batch form and created in the upload staging, and then processed and can be transformed, the original data in whatever format it is, and eventually comes in to the system as a pending tax form. And then we have background batch processes which can move the tax form through the different statuses and post it. So many of the things that I'm doing within the system throughout these lessons are a manual sort of simulation of what can take place when the system is running an automated process through nightly batch processes. So I'm not going to be looking in depth about these batch processes and how those work. Nonetheless, I just wanted to just expose you to the concept that there are upload processes to many of the things that we will see, and forms is one of them. And there is a whole process called form upload staging, which is involved in taking batch flat files, processing them, manipulating them, and then creating the tax forms, and then eventually validating and posting them in the system.